The unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect truth is seldom met with, even in 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it, we can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. I'm going to talk today about the Shurangama Litany or mantra. This is the ceremony that we did last night. The Buddha needed to get Ananda's attention and to do something dramatic and powerful enough to awake him from the stupor of intoxication with desire. This is one of the few occasions where the Buddha steps in to basically interfere a little with the training of one of his monks. This is a very powerful spiritual medicine and has the essential teachings that need to be understood to convert or transform our karma. The Buddha creates from light from his head to create 1,000-petaled jeweled lotus, with another Buddha sitting inside that, reciting the litany. The rays of light represent the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. The canopy of white light is embodied in the Bodhisattva, Unisha Sita Tapatra. She has a number of forms, two of which we have here for the retreat. These images were kind gifts from a photographer, John Bigelow Taylor, who published them in a book on Tibetan art. Master Kotan from Canada very kindly pointed these out to me, knowing that I was going to be doing a retreat. And I wrote to the artist, and he sent us these two images and made a print of the big one that's now on the altar. And I encourage anybody to take a look at it. Eloise Larson kindly put it in a nice mat and frame for us, and it's worth looking at. It's what that bodhisattva is trying to express is that all of these Buddhas and bodhisattvas can be embodied within the bodhisattva mind. That's the mind of selfless giving, the mind that is willing to forego the enjoyment of one's complete enlightenment for the benefit of working for all living things. Basically, the Buddha is creating a mandala of protection in which all the suffering in the universe is embraced and accepted within the womb of the Tathagata. And with the assistance of all these Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and through our meditation and mindfulness, we are able to cleanse ourselves of the involvement with enticements, fears, illness, distractions, and involvement with perceived objects, which have created our suffering. At the end of the litany, we also recite the scripture of great wisdom, which essentially dissolves the mantra and dissolves the causes of suffering into emptiness. It starts with the creation of this image of the transformed Tathagata, the transformed Buddha. Tathagata means thus come one, and it's in the translation we're using. I sometimes just read it as Tathagata, but thus come one sounds a little awkward. But the Buddha sits in this 1,000-petaled lotus of light. And it's so dramatic that the assembly is unable to hold on to their fears and desires. So they seek for the Buddha's compassion and help. The need to loosen our grip on the fears and desires is absolutely essential. And the way the Buddha is doing here is rattling this little karmic cage that we sit in. so that we can loosen the grip a bit on the bars of that cage. Our Master Hario gave a wonderful talk once about being like a bird in the cage where you're trying to fly out the top when in fact it has no bottom. And gripping the sides of this cage and flailing itself around with our old karma is, we have to loosen our grip here. It's the attachment to desires and aversions that perpetuates the suffering. Something has to get our attention. Sometimes it's a car accident, a divorce, a loss. Sometimes it's a nagging awareness that my life is not working right or completely fulfilling. But that first noble truth that suffering exists, the purpose of experiencing the suffering from old karma isn't to punish us. It's to teach us. It's to showing us that there's ignorance here. There's something I need to learn. And the fact of suffering is not a dismal reality. It's actually an honest assessment of how most of us confront our lives. And once we recognize that there's something that needs to be changed or corrected, then we can start to do something about it. The greatest addiction isn't to tobacco or alcohol or drugs. It's the addiction to this illusion of a self. We come equipped with habit energy from lifetimes of acting on this illusion. And that illusion arises because of our involvement with the senses and their objects. And this creates this sense of self and other. That letting go of the self and other, that's living in that place where there is no subject or object, is really what Stogan's talking about when he says, within these precepts dwell the Buddhas, enfolding all things within their unparalleled wisdom. There's no subject or object for any who dwell herein. All things, earth, trees, wooden posts, bricks and stones become Buddhas once this refuge is taken. From these precepts cometh forth such a wind and fire that all are driven into enlightenment when the flames are fanned by the Buddha's influence. Well, he's fanning the flames here in a very major way. If we can look at these enticements, distractions, these little imps of mischief and scorn, these demons of despair, we don't have to look outside of ourselves for these things. This is our old karma. Well, there was a little imp of mischief here a couple of weeks ago, however, who picked his dad's pocket and took his car keys, and Dad was looking for his car keys thinking that they had been lost. And I went to look for somebody to help look for them, and the little boy happened to be right there, and I said that his dad had lost his car keys, and he reaches into his pocket and he pulls out his car keys, and you could see this little look of it, this imp of mischief here. And we have all these little beings within ourselves, and I have a lovely poem sitting on my wall, my roomie, who says that the human body is like a guest house, and every day you can welcome whatever the crowd is that comes in. Just greet them at the door laughing. It's greeting them with kindness, seeing the Buddha nature even in our old karma. Because it's because of our old karma, it's because of suffering that we're drawn to Buddha's teaching. This is why the human existence is considered so karmically fortunate, because there's enough karma there to cause us to wake up because the suffering is there to get our attention. And then we have this wonderful teaching that allows us then to do something about it. The Chinese believe that the Sanskrit sounds also help with the creation of vibrations that assist in the efficacy of the recitation. And so they recite this with Chinese characters that recreate the sound of the Sanskrit original. And this is a valid way of reciting the litany. But by and large, we find that it really is helpful to understand what it is that you're saying. So Reverend Master Ji asked Reverend Master Hubert to put it into English. If you just tried to translate the Chinese characters, it would come out as gobbledygook, because it doesn't mean anything in Chinese. The characters are written to transliterate the Sanskrit. So he had to take those Chinese characters and figure out what the Sanskrit words were from the sound of the Chinese characters, and then translated them into English. And he attempted to keep the spirit of the vibrational theory by making the translation that can be chanted with vigor and energy. And Reverend Master Hubert considers the translating of the Shurangama litany the most important thing that he has done in his whole 80 years of life. And we're blessed to have this teaching and to be able to understand the meaning in the context of our own language and culture. But the way we said it last night was pretty good. There was a good deal of energy and enthusiasm. That's how this should be spoken. The importance of the Shurangama litany lies in the enormously beneficial teaching of how to embrace and accept one's suffering within the refuge of the Triple Treasure, and transform our behavior to learn how, with the help of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, to restrain these enticements and distractions with gentle kindness and friendliness. Restrain them in all the 10 quarters. Restrain them with full knowledge of what needs to be done. Restrain them with dignity and in full light. Restrain them with our very hands, with our very feet, with our whole body and every part of it. Especially restrain ourselves in our minds. So we call upon the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas to provide help and teaching to see the essential emptiness of the self and the emptiness of all the suffering that is created by clinging to this one fundamental illusion. And the way we do that is by looking within and developing patience with the mind in which no mental objects arise. Training ourselves to look inward and advance directly along the road that leads to the mind, as Dogen puts it. And remember how he explains the harmonization of body and mind. Is to turn the stream of compassion within, giving up both knowledge and its recognition. The Buddha is not a savior, and each of us is fully equipped to transform our old karma. As Ananda is learning in this sutra, the Buddha cannot do the work for him. The Buddha can show you what it is that needs to be done and explain how to do it. Ananda was vulnerable to the enticements of the young Vatangi woman because he had not trained his mind to be free from attachments to the objects of sense. In the Chinese Chan tradition, they chant this the Shurangama Litany as part of their morning service every day. So we'll be chanting it every afternoon. The strength of the spiritual medicine being offered here is that we need to look at all of our fears, distractions, enticements, physical illness, anything that creates suffering, and acknowledge the power that they can have if we do not apply mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom. The great body of transformations that is personified by the Bodhisattva Vajrasankara in the Litany is the power to transform or convert the inherent suffering into enlightenment by turning inwards and experiencing the pure awareness of the Buddha mind, undistorted by our old karma. This is essentially what the body of the sutra is focused on. The meditation techniques offered by the Buddha is to learn how to develop this patience with the mind of stillness. It's just sitting with no deliberate thought. The Charles Luck translation uses the phrase, the patient endurance of the uncreate. And this particular translation from the Buddhist Text Society, Translation Society uses it, developing patience with the mind in which no mental object arises. We will go into this in greater detail as the week progresses. For now, focus your attention on the teaching of the ceremony of the Shurangama Litany, which we will be doing every day. It can be helpful to memorize this, even though it is quite long. It can be helpful to recite it aloud or pray it in whispers or read it silently. I have one friend who reads it to her dogs every day. And you can take the booklet home with you that has the litany in it. And it's something that you can read whenever you feel you need some help. You can read it on a daily basis. You can read it when things get difficult and you don't know what to do. And you can just... I was reciting in the car on the way driving back from the Hermitage yesterday, or the day before. One of the monks told Reverend Master Hubert that he wanted to memorize it so he'd always have it with him. It's a lovely way of saying that. The real clue to what this litany is telling us is that by being mindful of those things that can cause suffering, our fears, our distractions, our worries, our frustrations, our inadequacies, if we can watch them arise, we have a choice to not feed them, but just to see them, welcome them and say, hello, old friend, and let him go out the back door. We don't have to entertain them. We don't have to feed them or keep them around. We have to be mindful of the fact that they will simply dissolve back into emptiness as long as we focus on our meditation and our awareness, rather than focusing on believing that there is something to fear or something to get distracted by. It's this clinging to the illusion of self, and that self exists only because the suffering exists. The reality is that everything in the physical world is an illusion, and it's happening within the womb of the Tathagata. It's happening within ultimate truth. But that all of that physical existence is in fact illusory and fundamentally empty. But that emptiness is not a negative void. Our Master Ji used to say, it's the fullest emptiness you'll ever know. Because when we can give up the self, we can know something. As Koho Zenji said, if you can give up something as small as the self, you can know something as great as the universe. That infinite presence is there right in the stillness. Time is not moving. Infinity is right here in this present moment. All we ever have is the present moment. The illusion of passing comes from physical reality that's constantly changing. And we have to constantly train both body and mind. When we talk about, in part of the scripture, when we get to the section on the turbidities, the Buddha has an image of simply this jar that's been of pure water that's had its soil added to it and it's been all stirred up. What we have to do is simply sit there and let it settle. There's nothing in our culture, in Western society, that encourages us to sit still. We're always encouraged to stir things up. We have a culture that says you need more. Whatever you have, it's not enough. You have to have something bigger, something better, something more. The economy has to be growing. Everything has to be bigger. And our suffering just gets bigger until we can be content with what we have. And that contentment lies in that stillness. All of that suffering is simply entertainment that we create because we're not trained to sit still. In that stillness, there's a subtle joy that is infinitely more wonderful than anything that we can get from this stimulation of the senses. The recitation of the litany is, in and of itself, has great benefit. But it is more than just reciting. We have to listen to what it's actually saying and respond in our behavior. That sense of being mindful of the demons. I have a friend who's been wrestling with the demon of despair for most of his 30 years of life, and he'd been really trying to learn his meditation because the medications don't always work, and he wanted to be able to do what he can with his mind. He got to the place where the thoughts would come and go, and that wasn't a big deal, and he could sit with that. But the emotions were still pretty problematical. That's the word he used. But one day he was experiencing an old karmic pattern of sadness that usually drove him into this place of total and utter despair, and how worthless he was and all of that. But as it arose, he saw he had a choice. If he could mindfully watch these feelings arise without participating in them, but just sit back and watch them. Be aware. And it could come and it could go. And he didn't have to join it. And it was absolutely transformative for him because it gave him true freedom. Just the freedom to let go of the suffering. Because this human birth is rare and is valuable, we must make good use of this fortunate birth, and even more because of the good karma that has resulted in our being drawn to Buddha's practice. The purpose of our suffering is to get us to the temple, to introduce Buddha's practice. And now we must learn how to transform it into something useful. One of my old friends reminded me of the first talk she ever heard me give, which was in the early 70s. It was on compost. My dad was an organic gardener, so I grew up with a big compost pile in our backyard. All of the stuff that we experience as suffering is just our garbage that has to be sorted out. We have to sort out the recyclables, and the compostables, and the reusables, and take a good look at that stuff and see what it is that we can do to make some good use of it. If there are old habits of criticism or complaint or fear or worry or frustration or inadequacy, those are the things that should be getting us our attention and telling us to wake up. Do you want to carry this on any further? How can I make use of this? What can I do to transform myself, to uncover the inherent Buddha nature that lies within us, that pure awareness? It's a question of training ourselves, using the suffering as the vehicle, and changing our perception of how we look at it. Not from something that we don't want to have, but something that we can use no matter how difficult it is to confront or look at it. It has the Buddha nature. There's nothing in this universe that doesn't have the Buddha nature. Delusion itself has the Buddha nature. It's a question of whether we see it as delusion and realize that we don't have to join it. The Shurangama Litany is something that if we venerate by practicing it, by reciting it, by realizing that it's got some incredible teaching on compassion and mindfulness, how to greet these difficulties with kindness, with awareness, with the full knowledge of what needs to be done to let go of this stuff. We have these wonderful gifts, and that gift is the presence of mind, which is our fundamental awareness. Never turn away from it. It is the true gift. However innumerable beings may be, I vow to save them all. However inexhaustible the passions may be, I vow to transform them all. However limitless the Dharma may be, I vow to comprehend it completely. However infinite the Buddha's truth is, I vow to realize it. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha.